Welcome to One Sharp Sword, cutting through to what matters most. I'm your host, guide, and coach on this journey. I'm Dr. Wayne Pernell, Dr. P, and with me today, Mark Schwartz, a private tech CFO, an ops executive, and I love this, a former corporate lawyer. I've worked with many recovering attorneys. I don't think that this was, I think you're taking your former life into your current life and not like letting it all go.
I'm still
I will
recovering, Wayne.
still recovering. Okay, well well, excellent. Let's talk about what you're up to right now. Let's talk about how you got here. Um, because if I say, wow, CFO, a tech CFO to talk to, a lot of people will go, oh, like, hmm. But you know what? Your leadership journey is something that I found amazing and delightful. And that is what I want to bring to our audience today. So, again, Mark Schwartz, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you being here. Talk a little bit about what you're up to and talk a little bit about what got you here.
Yeah, well, thank you, Wayne. As you and I have sort of developed a relationship over the last few months, I've really enjoyed getting to know you and what your mission is and what you're all about. So I really appreciate, and I'm honored, frankly, to that you asked me to be on your podcast in this forum. So thank you for that. I am currently the chief financial officer of a private equity backed machine learning based company that is focused in the retail supply chain space. So basically, we work with CPG companies and helping them
Consumer
um,
packaged goods for those
consumer
not
packaged
in the
goods,
biz. Okay.
CPG companies, consumer packaged goods, helping them optimize their revenue by reconciling the deductions, compliance, and other sort of fees and fines, et cetera, that they are very often charged from large retailers. And our platform will help these folks not only to recover revenues that were improperly deducted, um, but also to learn from those issues and to create an opportunity to avoid doing some of those same activities in the future.
So I'm going to pause right there because right, because what you do is like, wow, Mark, good for you. Like some people are going to go, you stop these companies from spending too much or from getting fined or whatever. And the reason I want to stop is because that's really important because what you do means that we as consumers pay less. Like if companies are paying more for their supply chain, if companies are paying more in fines or in licensing or any of those things, then it's not the companies that pay, right? It's like each of us as individuals pay a little bit and a little bit more. So your role, you're like Superman to us, right?
Well, it's an interesting collaboration between ourselves, the retailers, and the consumer packaged goods companies,
Yeah.
because both the retailer and the consumer packaged goods companies have incentive to keep their prices as reasonable as possible for the consumer. And they both recognize that there are inefficiencies in their systems, inherent in the myriad of deliveries and returns that we as consumers sort of run through the system. And rather than get bogged down by all of that, we help them become more efficient and to learn from those issues.
That's great. And so how do you do that? And yeah, how do you, like currently, how do you do that? How do you help them learn? Like what are some of the speed bumps that companies roll over that you go, hey, we can flatten that out and make it easier for you?
Yeah, at a high level, if you're a very, very large, sort of Fortune 100 consumer packaged goods company, Procter and Gamble, Unilever, those types. Or you are a up and coming retailer with maybe one product, a new fuzzy drink that is selling on Amazon or in Walmart or in Target, et cetera. Um, in either case, you are, well, take the small retailer, for example, the up and comer. Maybe they're negotiating a first time deal with a large retailer and expecting to generate certain amount of profit from that relationship. And 6 months, a year in, they realize their profit isn't as great from that relationship as they expected it to be and can't figure out exactly why. We help them reconcile that and sort through delivering to a retailer on time and in full versus missing the amount, a small portion of of the amount that you're supposed to ship to that retailer. Maybe you delivered it to different warehouses. Um,
Mm.
and you know, there's 400 different reasons why you might think your actions are appropriate, but for the large retailer that requires system and process in order for them to function, given the thousands and thousands of suppliers they deal with on a regular basis, and the hundreds of thousands or millions of different products that are on their shelves or online in their stores. Um, if you fall outside of the procedures that they like to follow, then there's likely dollars that you're missing and don't have an avenue to recover. We help you find those avenues to recover those dollars.
How does this differ, Mark? How does this differ from like forensic accounting?
It is a form of forensic accounting. Many of our team members are CPAs.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
All right.
it's exactly what we're doing.
That's awesome. So you're also looking for areas of potential embezzlement. You're looking for anywhere that you've got this bucket of money and there are deliberate spouts where it's going, but there may be leaks that nobody actually knew about, and that's what you're looking at.
Yeah, we aren't mandated or nor really in the business of looking for fraud detection and embezzlement, as you mentioned. But you do see as you reconcile areas that might cause further inquiry for for that consumer packaged goods company.
That's
So yeah,
amazing.
it can highlight lots of things in their day to day that they were not aware
All right, so you let's talk about you, the human. All right.
of.
Mark Schwartz, the human. You didn't wake up one day and go, I'm gonna be a CFO in a tech firm. I'm gonna help with ops. I'm gonna focus on supply chain logistics and accounting. And like that is, kind of a very specific niche slowly that you find yourself in. So um let's wind back the clock to even where you grew up, then college, then like the jobs that got you here and what you learned along the way that made you want to go into this very specifically.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in New York on Long Island, fairly far out east on the island. So I like to sort of talk about remembering growing up with duck farms and potato farms and so forth out on the island. It's a bit different today, obviously, like other places are, but
Yeah.
it was a great place to grow up. I went to college on an academic scholarship to the University of Miami. I studied finance and really gravitated to that because my brain has always seemed to sort of work in numbers. Um, I'm driving down the street, Wayne, and I'm counting things on the side of the road. Like I can't turn off the number part of my brain. That's just how it operates.
So you like that was you as a kid too, right? That you just saw patterns and you saw numbers and they just all fell
Math was
apart.
always my best subject. Yeah,
That was your
I was.
language. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's great.
And but I always had a sort of a voracious appetite for history and philosophy. And I when I went to college, I went to college intending to study philosophy. And I think I just sort of realized over the course of my first year that I didn't know a lot of employed philosophers, and and I'm sure I was coached
How, how
by
practical of you.
family and friends and otherwise, that given my sort of proficiency in math, that maybe I should look at at other aptitude at other areas to sort of exploit those aptitudes.
Sure.
And so I did. I became a finance major and I was an accounting minor, and spent a little bit of time post college playing rugby over in the UK, and came back to the real world after a great experience and worked for Citibank as a financial analyst for about a year.
Can I pause you for a
Of
second?
course.
You don't just like go off to the UK to play rugby. Like what brought you there? And I had a good experience, so I came back. What let's
Uh,
go into specifics around that. What
yeah.
got you into
So
rugby in the UK? Because
we
that
had
is
a
something special.
rugby club team in school,
Uh-huh.
and that was sort of my first exposure to it. And I wanted to continue. I wanted to try to continue to play. I've always loved team sports, and I played every sport growing up. Um, and so it was a sort of a great opportunity for me to continue participating in a team sport in more than just a hobby, if you will. So I went over to the UK and through a friend of mine got connected into a local team in Ilford in the east side of London, and tried out for their squad, and I became a member of their rugby club and worked my way up to a couple of their teams, never reaching the top team or even the second level team, but had a ball and made some friends, and just really got to enjoy that sort of camaraderie that you get playing team sports. And really, for me, continuing to learn about a sport that I continue to love today, and the Rugby World Cup is every 4 years, and so I've been to a number of them over the years, and I do follow it still.
Amazing. That is amazing. And then what was the good experience that brought you back to work here? And
Well,
you said Citibank, I think was
yeah,
where you were.
I knew that I, I wasn't certain what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
I knew it would likely involve finance or math to some degree, um, but I wasn't certain, and I had ideas to go back to graduate school, and I was thinking about getting an MBA. Um, I was thinking about getting a law degree. I think that the earlier um, sort of days of thinking about philosophy and history, et cetera, probably weighed into that decision around law school versus graduate school. But came back and worked for Citibank while I was thinking about sort of what was next for me. And had a really interesting role. I was a financial analyst for a company that they acquired called the International Brokerage Estimate Service, IBES. And our role was really reconciling and documenting. Um, this was in the early 90s, so at the time, international data uh, and international accounting uh, was much more different from U.S. GAAP accounting than it is today, where there's
Mhm.
becoming a convergence of international standards and U.S. GAAP standards. But our role as analysts uh, was 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 trying to help the U.S. investor understand what those international accounts really meant from a U.S. GAAP perspective. So there was some reconciliation that we were involved in at IBIS, and it was really interesting work. It was very technical and meaty from a accounting and math perspective. So I really enjoyed that. But
So pause for a second. Talk
yeah,
for just a second about what when you talk about the gap, like that's not a term that's sort of in day-to-day conversation in terms of, the difference of whatever. So
it is in my world, even
yes.
still. Yeah. So when you're dealing with recognizing revenue, as an example, under international accounting standards versus US GAAP standards, there are different policies in place.
So
This is
US
one
GAAP standards is maybe I'm the only one, but I don't know that I've heard that term.
US GAAP, US generally accepted accounting principles, US GAAP.
Sorry, that was good one. Okay. So that's an acronym that okay.
My apologies, yeah, but
Nope,
in
good.
my world, that one's we live in that every day. But US generally accepted accounting principles, US GAAP
Got it. Okay.
versus international accounting standards. And so
Got
there is a gap, 1A gap, GAAP, between those two. And the standards are converging, but there was a period of time where they were much more different than they are today. So reading an income statement generated under international accounting standards in 1990 could have looked uh, significantly different than the same uh, income statement that had been generated under US GAAP principles.
got it.
And
Okay.
so for the US investor, you were looking at an international accounting standards income statement if you're looking at the accounting for a gold mine in Australia. And how do you compare that? What would that look like if it were under US GAAP standards?
Got it. Thank you. I was thinking gap. What's the like where's the gap? Like what gap do you need to bridge? Generally accepted principles of accounting is
Yeah,
great.
generally accepted accounting standards,
Okay.
accounting principles, GAAP.
Okay. Awesome. Cool.
Yeah, so I decided to go to law school, and so I went to the University of San Diego in California. My intention was knowing that lawyers, not always certainly, but tend to work in the state or the city where they go to law school. Um, I decided to go to California and chase some good weather,
Mm,
and did so. So went to law school in San Diego, and then met my wife there in school, and we moved up to San Francisco, and that's where I began practicing law. So I did that for about 6 years. I was a corporate attorney, focusing on mostly M&A transactions, corporate licensing, corporate partnerships, um, corporate entity formation, and um, helping clients understand where to put entities, in which geographies, and the various arm's length transactions and arm's length agreements between entities, so that you create a reasonable set of policies under which those governments in each of those countries can can consider um, how you are operating between entities, and
mm,
doing so in a way that is creating the appropriate amount of tax in each of those entities. So you can no longer, long gone are the days where you might be able uh, to pick an entity in a certain location and put all of your expenses in that entity, and and pay no tax in that entity, or less tax in that entity because they had a lower tax rate. Governments are tax revenue generation organizations are very sharp on that now, certainly over the last 30 years. So that sort of entity shopping, venue shopping, if you will, is much more difficult. So you set up arm's length negotiations and transactions between those entities to make sure that you are doing so in a way that reasonably allocates revenue and expenses, and provides those governments an opportunity to actually generate tax revenue um, as appropriate.
that's great. You love this, don't you?
I'm a math guy. My brain works that way. I can't help it.
That's awesome. What would you say are some of the leadership lessons that you've learned along the way? You've had to struggle with various corporations. I wouldn't maybe not say struggled, but you've wrestled with various organizations, various legislative issues, multiple government regulations. What are some of the like key leadership lessons along the way? Where have been your growth edges? Where have been your, wow, if I knew that before, this would have been so much easier. Where have been those kind of moments for you?
Yeah, there's several of them. Following my stint as an attorney, how that ended is I had an opportunity um, uh, to be assigned to work with a gentleman who was starting a company, and and I had already decided as a lawyer that I didn't love the transactional nature of it. I would work on a large M&A transaction, a corporate roll-up of 6 or 7 entities or whatever it was, for 6, 8 months or more. And the day it closes, that company or companies are off to execute on their strategy. And as a lawyer, you're on to the next deal.
Mm,
And I didn't love that. Good lawyers love that. They love the diversification they get in their practice, different industries, different people, management teams, et cetera. I didn't like that. I felt like I knew so much about the transaction and the strategy and the structure and the people and the teams that I wanted to be a part of that. Maybe that gets back to my love of team sports. So I remember having the discussion with my wife, Wayne, and telling her, like, gosh, I don't have any ideas of my own to start a company. I think I'm going to join one of these companies. And my thinking at the time was, look, if it flops as many startups do, or it's unsuccessful as lots of businesses can become, then it's still going to be an MBA on the fly for me. And I could always go back to practicing law. That's kind of how I thought about it.
that's great.
And so I made the jump with this gentleman who was starting a business. We really hit it off, and he and I and 2 other folks started this company, and that became a company called Fabrinet. Um, so I was the chief financial officer and head of HR and IT, um, and a
Those are
couple other
those are all
departments.
such different roles. Those are
Well,
all such different roles.
they are, but definitely today's CFO, and I was not a trendsetter or anything, maybe earlier adopter, if you will, but those are fairly normal for CFOs uh, to manage. Certainly, IT. In my case, legal was easy, transition because I had been a lawyer, and um, and so that's sort of my purview was IT, HR, finance, and legal to begin with. And we started by acquiring a a factory just north of Bangkok, Thailand, from a company called Seagate Technology, which it still is a prominent hard disk drive manufacturer, storage company. And so my partner, the founder of this business, had been one of the founders of Seagate, and knew all the folks internally, even though he hadn't been there for 8 or 10 years. And so we acquired a factory, and the idea was to take these disciplines from the hard disk drive industry and apply them to a different industry, to the fiber optic component manufacturing industry. And so I knew really very little about either of these industries. I mean, I knew what a disk drive was, and I knew what a fiber optic cable was, but I didn't really know much about these industries at all. And so Tom Mitchell was the founder CEO. What he uh, taught me over the years and really got me interested up front is the many of the principles involved in building a hard disk drive, from the electromechanical capabilities and the engineering requirements, were absolutely needed in the manufacture of these fiber optic components, these photonic devices. And many of the tests that are used to determine if a hard disk drive is functioning as it's supposed to are the same tests you would apply
Mhm.
to the fiber optic component. And so there were enough similarities where he felt like this was an industry that badly needed a manufacturer that had processes and controls that weren't existing in that industry at the time. And so basically we acquired a factory from Seagate and began to to build subassemblies for Seagate out of that factory because it was a factory they were using for their own manufacturing. And then we very quickly started to spin up a sales team and an engineering team and a product team effectively in our engineering to go to the fiber optic community and convince those folks that we could do a better job manufacturing their products than they could themselves because we had these very principled set of processes and controls that were required of their industry, and they were lacking in those areas. And so the plan was to continue to grow to maintain the hard drive business that we had and to grow the fiber optic business. And we knew that the hard drive business was going to go away in about 3 years because we signed a 3-year contract with Seagate, and their plan was after 3 years, they're going to move this to one of their other factories. That actually lasted about 4.5 years, ultimately.
Hmm.
And our revenue was fairly flat for those first 4.5 years. But if you looked under the hood, it was rapidly evolving from 100% hard disk drive manufacturing revenue down to from about 160 million down to zero. And we replaced it with optical communications component revenue that went from zero to 160 million in about the same time.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then we were off and running. Yeah,
Assuming that was by design, right? That
correct.
it's like you've got this decline, this rise. That's great. It's great.
The timing it took, the revenue level of optical communications equipment, um, we took advantage of a great time in the burgeoning internet and in communications and applications like Facebook and others coming out, Skype at the time and others that were driving bandwidth requirements and the need for more fiber optic equipment. Um, but we didn't really know exactly how that would all come together. But we did know the one thing we knew for certain is the Seagate revenue was going away, and so we had to replace it.
So talk about your decision-making processes because the internal workings at Seagate, that makes sense. You did some predictive analysis and right, you saw this and you saw the potential for a climb and you happened to merge them so it stayed relatively steady.
You know you are bigger than the life you are leading. It really is time to attend to that thing you've wanted to do or have, but you've been putting off. It's time to step into that dream you've parked for someday. It's time to claim true well-being, both personally and professionally, without giving up the success that got you here. It's time to check out Dr. Pernell's signature small group retreat, the Exponential Success Summit. Explore exponentialsuccesssummit.com. Seats are extremely limited as this is a very special small group event. www.exponentialsuccesssummit.com.
What was your decision making? What were the sort of, wow, smack you in the face kind of the leadership note that needs to be stated right now is what were those moments like for you?
Yeah, so there's a few maybe to talk about here. One was I had been a lawyer and and I had been a lawyer for about 6 years. So I wasn't managing anybody as a lawyer. I was an individual contributor effectively and a team contributor. Now suddenly I am the CFO and head of IT and the general counsel and head of HR at a 1,600 person company. I think we started with 1,400 people when we acquired the factory. And and in the midst of, or in the beginnings of a transformation of that business from one industry to another. Um, I will tell you, I had no idea what the heck I was doing, Wayne. And my personality and maybe many others in the position at the time would have done something similar, but I started grabbing everything with both hands, and I was very poor at delegating. I wanted to learn everything I could about the industry, our
Well,
business, our customers, And because I was legal and finance, I was negotiating all of the customer contracts and then determining with my very strong accounting team how we were going to account for all of that. And so it took me years to sort of recognize that I was a very, very poor manager at the time. I was not delegating. I cared for my team, which I think is the single most important component of leadership. I really
Yeah.
cared about their welfare and their families, right? Because when you hire somebody, you're not only hiring that person, you are hiring their family and a very close circle around them. Um, so that was always there for me. But I was a very, very poor manager. We never had discussions about their career growth and and their development in their roles and what they wanted to do next. And I was very poor at delegating. You know, if something I knew I could teach somebody and it might take me an hour or two, but I could do it myself in 20 minutes, I always did it myself for the most part. And those were very, very poor decisions, you know, as I look back a few years later. Thankfully, I think it had a lot to do with the care I showed for my team. We got through that, and it was hardly ever even recognizable to me that there was anybody that was sort of disgruntled or wanted to have deeper discussions than they were having with me about their place in the company. Um, but but we had a few things that really impacted us as a business that caused me to look differently at how I operated as a manager. Probably the most influential was about 5 years into the company. We were now virtually 100% fiber optic. We were on a trajectory where I think we had just hit or were near 300 million in revenues. And for 2 or 3 quarters, our revenue was fairly steady. It wasn't growing. And that growth that we had experienced, that hyper growth that we had experienced, was waning. And I remember Tom, our CEO, um, you know, came to me and said, "Hey, we're going to bring in a outside consultant to sort of help us understand what's happening here. We're not growing like we're expecting to grow." And so I was a team player, and I thought, okay, you know, great. Well, I'll go along with it, and whatever you need me to do to be involved, I'm happy to do it. Internally, I was thinking, what a complete waste of time this is going to be. Why in the world are we bringing somebody on the outside who doesn't know anything about our business? What's he going to tell us? I was dead wrong. You know, this gentleman interviewed about 120 people over the course of maybe 6 weeks from every department, from engineering to the manufacturing operations to IT to the tech side, everywhere,
Mm.
and came back to the core group of us, 3 or 4 or 5 sort of senior management, and said, "You guys have done a great job hiring." And he looked at if you're familiar with the old Jack Welch sort of model of maybe 10% of your team are sort of, you know, type A, as he called it, where that's your next generation of leadership.
Sure.
And the engine of your business, sort of type B, is about 80%, 85% of your company. Really, really critical to the success of the business. And then there's the 5 or 10% type C that either aren't fit for the role that they're in, aren't fit for the business or the industry, for a variety of reasons, and often self-select out before they're ever even terminated. And he said to us, "You probably have 35 or 40% type A. You've done an amazing job hiring. The problem is you are not giving these folks your vision. You're not sharing the vision. You're not
Mm.
sharing the direction. They don't understand what the values of the company are. They don't understand what your long-term goals are as a business." And that's when the light bulb went off for me. And I thought, gosh, he is 100% correct. And I had started seeing sort of little pockets of almost a mini companies, if you will,
Mm.
that had surfaced within our company. I remember in one case, um, we had a chief technical officer who really was running our technology, but also managing our early customers. And then as we got bigger, we brought in a chief operating officer, and all of our new customers had moved into the chief operating officer for the most part. And I remember at one point, one of the chief operating officer's team members came to me and said, "We'd like to hire our own CTO." And I thought, well, I said to him, well, you have a CTO. He said, yeah, but we don't get enough access to him. He's focused on his own customers, and we'd like to bring in our own CTO. And I remember having some really sarcastic answer like, oh, sure, why don't we just have two of everything in the company? Let's get two CFOs and two CEOs. Why not? Um, and I realized going through this exercise with this consultant that was helping us that that we were not sharing our vision. We were not creating avenues for collaboration. We were not giving folks the direction. They didn't understand why we were making certain moves at a senior level that we were making. And I realized that while I thought everybody must know what we're doing, that what is in your head as a
Yeah.
manager isn't necessarily um, what those around you know and understand. And so it really became obvious to us that we needed to go back to square one and to build a mission and to build a vision and to articulate and memorialize our values. They all existed, but we hadn't
Yes.
put it in any format
You
focused
didn't,
on sharing that.
yeah, you didn't
And
codify it. Yeah.
no, not at all. And
It's
so
amazing.
for me, I took that a couple of steps further and realized that part of any confusion or disruption we were creating as a senior management team was not only not articulating all of these things that we then went and articulated, but for each of us personally and me personally, we needed to make sure we were getting our message through to our team members. And we needed to make sure that they understood the importance, in our view, of collaboration and the importance, in our view, of any of these other values or, uh, or objectives that were getting us close to our mandate and where we wanted to take the company in the future.
This is great. I want to pause you for a second. You've said some
Yeah.
amazing stuff that actually lights me up because that's my kind of specialty area as a consultant. So I do consulting and coaching, and this was interesting. I'm gonna read. You'll see me looking down. I'm reading from some notes I took as you were talking. As you entered this role, you were used to being a team contributor and became a CFO over 1,600 people, all in transition because the company was in transition. You took on everything, and even though you cared for the team, you noted in retrospect that trying to handle everything and juggle everything made you a bad manager, a poor
Yes.
manager is what you said. Um, and that I just wanted to highlight that management, like the difference between leadership and management comes from the Latin for manos, which is hands-on, and being there and having the discussions about bench and career development and career growth. Like, where do you want to be? And actually putting yourself into, you care about their families and you care about them, and part of caring is saying, okay, and this is how we're going to develop you, right? This is so I love that you had that insight and that you really focused on, so what is next for the people that I'm responsible for? What's next? And putting yourself there. I love that you had the realization that an outside consultant was not a waste of time, but actually brought you outside perspective. One of the things I say is that, as a consultant, I've got a perspective you don't have. You can't ask a fish what water is like because there's no sense of not water by the fish. And so I come in and I go, hey, this is what it looks like over here, and this is what it looks like over here. So I love that you actually realized. Oh, right. An outside consultant that can have conversations that each individual couldn't actually have that many. But one person from the outside could go to all the different sections, build the bridges between, it's interesting because I find that almost every chief executive officer, every or CXO, chief, right? So every executive team member, they're like, yeah, we can't stand it when there are silos. And yet there are silos, right? So it's like, so how do you build the bridges? And that's where an outside agent can really do the thing. And then you talked about something else that lit me up, which I'm very excited about, Mark, because it's like it does start with values. And does everybody know what those values are? Oh, wait, those values feed the vision. And does everybody know what the vision is? And the vision feeds the strategy. And not everybody thinks that way. But if you do, if you wind it back and go, okay, even in my personal life, for my personal goals, I have these values and I have this desire, and the dream looks like this. That's called a vision, right? The dream that looks like this. And then how many people around you actually know it so that they can support you in that? That's huge. And without conveying it, you said one of the last things you said was um, the senior management team created confusion by not actually sharing it.
Hmm.
And so, confused mind can't actually focus in and give its best, right? So, like these are the leadership lessons that I really wanted to massage out of the entire story because where you've been and what you've grown and yes, you're a math guy. Yes, you're a finance guy. Yes, you're all that. You're also human. And there's that very warm part of you that it's like, and I want the best for everybody. And you didn't say it that way, but that's really what comes out of you. And I appreciate that about you.
I
Uh,
think if I can cut you off a little bit, Wayne, I think
please.
that was um, I agree, and I think that that's the only reason I was able to continue to build my team and keep that team cohesive in the midst of poor management on my part was because I think I was a pretty good leader of those folks in that they knew I cared about them and they knew that that if they had made a mistake based on the best available information at the time, later we learned something and it negated anything that they had put in place previously on that topic. They could come to me and say, hey, this has changed. We didn't know this before. We now know it. And I'd like to change our strategy as a result. And I
I
would have
love
their
that.
back 100% of the time and not focus on why didn't we know that earlier
Oh, yeah.
and focus on, okay, great that we know that now. What does that change for us? There is always an element of closing the loop on that, on that failure, if you will. That's a sort of a manufacturing term on a closed loop failure analysis. But you do need to go back and say, okay, why didn't we know that before? But you can't do that in a defensive way, and it can't be the first discussion. The first discussion has to be great. Okay, what we know now, how does that change our strategy? How does it change what we wanted to implement? And then you go and you make those changes. I always tell folks the second that we laminate our business plan is the day that our business begins to deteriorate. You
Yeah.
always have to be looking for how new information is going to impact your decision making and decisions you've already made. But the first step can't be why didn't we know this before? The first step needs to be, okay, with what we know, how do we advance that? How do we change our agenda? How do we change our strategy? And then there's a time to go back and say, what have we learned here? How can we figure
Yeah.
this out earlier than we now know it?
I love that. This is so important. It's not why, which is blameful. But it's how, right? So I love that you've like that is part of the culture build. So that is, there are a lot of cultures that are built on blame storming. Whose fault is this? We'll get to the bottom of it, grr, right? And there's a lot of that. And that doesn't move the company forward. What moves the company forward is this culture of um, if it was a mistake, what did we learn? Like, what did
Mhm.
we learn? So we as an organization are learning and growing. How much did it cost us all to learn that? And there's this curiosity that's embedded versus this gotcha mentality. Oh, you were out of place. Gotcha. Which is terrible. Instead of, okay, we found out with new information, we found out this wasn't the path. Excellent. What did we learn? Love that. Closed loop failure analysis is a great term that I think we could all incorporate into our lives, in terms of, now that we're beyond it, let's take a look at what happened.
Mhm.
Right. We can all do that about our adolescence if we think about it. Now that we're beyond it, did we learn anything? Yeah. So none of us have to repeat that, and we probably, have done that anyway. I just want to come back to, it's not about why, it's about how, so why is such a blameful word unless you just relax with it and go, okay, what really, like, use different language around it. What really happened? What can we learn? How do we move forward? Those are so empowering and so important.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And circling back to post this this uh, consultant and what we learned from that as a group, I think, a small senior executive team. I think there were 4 or 5 of us at the time, and we all committed to greater visibility and promoting what we already believed was a real key to our success in collaborating cross departmentally. And so I think at the time we probably had, Wayne, maybe 6 or 7 thousand employees. And so we determined how we were going to cascade messages down to the VP level and down to the director level. We
Communication plan is so important. I worked with a company that had over 3,000 employees, and their communication plan was, at the time that they were doing a massive initiative, their communication plan was, the managers will know what to say.
Right, exactly. And that's how we operated previous to this. So, but we even did an all hands. We rented a stadium. We got all 6 or 7 thousand people together. We did a series of offsites, director level and above, for 2 or 3 days at a time. Packed agenda on all of these things that were really important to us that we had
You
never
are
shared or
singing
created
my
with.
song. This
Yeah.
is so good.
And you know what happened? Shockingly, within 2 or 3 quarters, we saw that growth come back. Over the course of 10 years, I guess 12 years, because I was at the company for 12 years, um, we reached 1 billion in revenue. And, we took the company public on the New York Stock Exchange in 2010, um, and all sorts of lessons learned and around that whole exercise. But a very, very positive experience for everyone. Fabrinet is still a public and independent company today. I think it's about a 14 billion market cap business, about a 3.5 billion annual revenue business. Um, all started with the 4 of us back in 2000, and really accelerated through that exercise of deciding we needed to be more uh, to give greater visibility and promote these things that are really important to us in growing our business, and that really enabled us to continue to grow.
That's amazing. All right.
One
Well,
more story I'll give you on that, and
yeah,
this
and
is for
we're
me
we're coming
personally.
up on our time. So, quick story,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then
So,
yeah.
so me personally, so I'm a golfer when I can, and so I remember taking a golf lesson um, about 2008 or nine. So years after we had already sort of transformed how we were speaking to our team and messaging and creating visibility, et cetera. And the golf instructor was trying to get me to do this one move, and I couldn't do it. And this went on for 6 or 7 weeks of these, hourly lessons. And finally, she said it to me in a different way and what she wanted me to do. And immediately I was able to do it, and I could see it on video screens. And I said to her, "How did that happen? Like, how did you do that?" And she said, "My job as a coach is to figure out as many different ways to tell you the same thing as I possibly can,
Mm.
knowing that one of them is going to resonate with you.
Yeah.
And that for me was sort of the second sort of transformational leadership lesson for me, because taking that with everything else that I had learned over the years at Fabrinet, I realized at that moment that, yeah, she's 100% correct. In that, how many times do you leave a meeting and 2 or 3 days later you're chatting with someone who was in the meeting, and they're regurgitating back to you something that happened in the meeting, and you're thinking, well, that's not what I said. That's not what we're off to do.
Yeah.
And so the idea of really communicating with your audience by trying to connect them to the message by saying it as many different ways as you can. And I use that to this day, 15 years later. I continually try to figure out new ways to say what I'm off to do or what we're doing as a company,
Yeah.
because it takes those different ways to connect with everybody.
It does. And all too often, what I've seen is the leaders will just be louder. It's like, it's this, rah, and it's like, it's this, just do it. And it's like, well, if it's not translating for whatever reason to the people that need to be doing it, it does need to be said differently. That is a that is a great story. Great story. And yeah, that's worth leveraging forever. That's awesome. All right. So anything we haven't talked about that you were hoping we'd cover, and if people wanted to find you, how would they do that?
Yeah, yeah. I think, look, after I left Fabrinet, for the most part, have been an operator at other businesses. I was a CFO at a company called Mark Forged, which we took public on the New York Stock Exchange in 2021. I've spent most of my time in the last 10 or 12 years in software. I'm currently at a software and services really business. And if anybody wants to reach me, they're welcome to reach me at my current company, Stat Recovery. So Mark, M-A-R-K, at stat, S-T-A-T, recovery.com. Very simple. I'd love to hear from anybody.
That's awesome. Good. Mark at statrecovery.com and on LinkedIn, Mark Schwartz. This was great. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time and the insights, the story, the journey. You and I had talked before, and I didn't know three-quarters of what you shared today. This was really great. So thank you. All righty. Our
You're
guest,
very welcome, Wayne. I've really enjoyed talking with you as well.
I've enjoyed having you. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Our guest today, Mark Schwartz. This is One Sharp Sword, cutting through to what matters most. Again, our guest, Mark Schwartz, and I am Dr. P, Dr. Wayne Pernell, your host, guide, and coach on this journey. We'll see you again next time. Thanks for joining us.